Racism, particularly anti-black racism, remains one of the most pervasive and deeply entrenched social issues worldwide. For centuries, black people have endured systemic discrimination, violence, and exclusion in various forms, whether through slavery, colonization, apartheid, or more modern iterations of racial prejudice and bias. Despite the progress made toward equality and civil rights in many parts of the world, racism continues to affect black people in nearly every corner of the globe. Whether in the form of overt hostility or subtle exclusion, the lived experience of black people in many societies is shaped by a historical context of racial oppression that still casts a shadow over contemporary social, economic, and political systems. In many countries, the impact of this historical and structural racism is still evident today. In some nations, black people are outright excluded from participating in public life, face significant barriers to economic success, and are often subjected to violence, discrimination, and stereotyping based on their skin color. While no country is entirely free from racial prejudice, certain nations have systems and cultural dynamics that exacerbate the challenges faced by black communities. This is particularly true in places where the majority population is homogeneous or where deep-seated racial hierarchies, often linked to colonial or slave trade histories, continue to shape social norms. Understanding where black people are most unwelcome requires an exploration of both the historical and contemporary contexts of racism. In some countries, this exclusion is rooted in centuries-old colonial relationships, while in others, it is a product of more recent immigration patterns or growing nationalist movements. The forms of discrimination vary widely, from physical violence and hate crimes to more institutionalized racism in the form of discriminatory laws and practices in education, employment, and law enforcement. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel before you begin for more updates in the future. Number 1. Italy. Italy's history of racial discrimination against black people is deeply rooted, and while the country celebrates its cultural heritage, black individuals, especially those from African countries, face widespread prejudice. In southern Italy, black migrants, particularly from sub-Saharan Africa, are subjected to overt racism, physical attacks, and exclusion from public spaces. Despite anti-racism laws, enforcement is weak, and racial profiling by law enforcement is common. Black Italians also experience significant challenges in securing employment, housing, and educational opportunities. Moreover, the rise of far-right politics, especially the League Party, has intensified anti-black rhetoric, making it harder for black people to integrate and find acceptance in Italian society. Number 2. Russia. Racial discrimination in Russia is severe, with black people, especially from African nations, facing physical violence, harassment, and social exclusion. Far-right extremist groups are particularly active in targeting black individuals, and there have been numerous reports of attacks. In addition to physical violence, racial profiling by police is commonplace, where black people are often stopped and searched without cause. The Russian media often perpetuates negative stereotypes of black people, further fostering a culture of xenophobia. Many black people, particularly students from African countries, report feeling unsafe and unwelcome in Russian cities. The lack of effective legal protections against racism leaves black people vulnerable to discrimination in employment, education, and public life. Number 3. China. Despite its strong economic relations with African countries, China has a reputation for widespread racial discrimination, especially against black people. Africans, particularly those living in cities like Guangzhou, face hostility and exclusion in public spaces. Reports of racial discrimination in housing, restaurants, and public transportation are common. Media portrayals often reinforce negative stereotypes about black people, further fueling prejudice. During the COVID-19 pandemic, black people in China were disproportionately targeted with discriminatory measures such as forced evictions and quarantine enforcement, revealing deep-seated racism. Moreover, The Chinese social hierarchy places black people at a significant disadvantage, and there are limited legal protections against racial discrimination, making it difficult for them to challenge mistreatment. Number 4. Japan. Japan's homogeneous society has created an environment where people of different races, especially black people, face exclusion and prejudice. While the country is known for its technological advancements and cultural richness, black people, both foreigners and Japanese-born, often experience social alienation. Negative stereotypes of black people are perpetuated in media and pop culture, portraying them as criminal or exotic. Employment discrimination is widespread, with black people finding it difficult to secure jobs outside of specific industries such as English teaching or entertainment. In social settings, black people report feeling marginalized or excluded, with limited opportunities for meaningful social interactions. The lack of racial diversity in Japan contributes to these challenges, as cultural homogeneity is often prioritized over inclusivity. Number 5. France. France, with its history of colonization and immigration, has a complex racial landscape. Despite the country's proclaimed commitment to human rights and equality, black people, particularly those from former French colonies, face ongoing discrimination in housing, employment, and education. The legacy of colonialism plays a significant role in shaping attitudes towards black people, with many facing racial stereotypes that portray them as inferior or untrustworthy. The rise of far-right political movements in recent years has further exacerbated these issues, fostering anti-immigrant and anti-black sentiment. In addition to societal racism, police violence against black people, especially in the banlieues, suburbs, where many black people live, remains a significant issue. Number 6. South Korea. South Korea's relatively homogeneous society presents challenges for black people, particularly those from African or African American backgrounds. Racial discrimination in South Korea is often subtle but pervasive, with black people frequently encountering xenophobic attitudes and stereotypes. The media often portrays black people through a narrow lens, either as criminal or exotic, which perpetuates negative public perceptions. Many black expatriates or students find it difficult to integrate into South Korean society, and discrimination in employment is common. Black people seeking work outside of specific sectors like English teaching or entertainment often face barriers to securing positions due to racial bias. Additionally, there is a lack of legal protection for individuals facing racial discrimination, which makes it difficult for black people to challenge mistreatment. Number 7. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's social and racial hierarchies place black people, especially migrant workers from African countries, at the bottom of the social ladder. The country's history of slavery and the ongoing exploitation of migrant laborers contributes to systemic racial discrimination. African migrant workers, particularly from countries like Ethiopia and Sudan, face severe mistreatment, including poor working conditions, long hours, and low wages. Black people are often marginalized and stereotyped, with limited opportunities for upward mobility. In addition to the exploitation of labor, black people in Saudi Arabia often experience social exclusion and cultural marginalization, and the country's legal system does little to protect them from discrimination. Number 8. Spain. Spain, while a member of the European Union and generally considered progressive, still grapples with significant racial issues, particularly towards black people. These problems are rooted in Spain's colonial past, which involved the enslavement and exploitation of African people. Although Spain is home to a sizable African immigrant population, black people often face racism and discrimination in housing, employment, and public life. Reports of racial profiling by police, particularly in areas with high concentrations of black immigrants, are common. Additionally, black people in Spain are often stereotyped as being criminal or undesirable, with the media frequently reinforcing these negative portrayals. The lack of sufficient anti-racism education and legal protections further exacerbates these issues. Number 9. India. India's racial dynamics are complicated, shaped by centuries of caste-based discrimination and colonial history. Although India has a diverse population, black people, particularly those from African countries, often face significant racism and prejudice. African immigrants and students are frequently subjected to verbal abuse, physical attacks, and racial profiling. Stereotypes about black people being linked to criminality or drug use are prevalent in Indian society, and such stereotypes are often reinforced in the media. African nationals living in India have reported being treated as second-class citizens, and incidents of violence against them have been widely documented. The lack of widespread awareness and education about racism in India contributes to the persistence of these issues. Number 10. Bahrain, a small island nation in the Middle East, has a complex relationship with race. The country relies heavily on migrant labor, including workers from South Asia and Africa, but these workers are often subjected to exploitation and abuse. Black migrant workers, particularly from African countries, face significant challenges, including being treated as inferior by both employers and the local population. Discrimination in the workplace is common, and workers often endure poor living conditions, low wages, and long hours. Despite the country's wealth, black people in Bahrain remain marginalized, and their contributions to the economy are often overlooked. The social structure in Bahrain maintains racial hierarchies, with black workers at the bottom, struggling to achieve social mobility or equal treatment. This is it for today's video. How do you feel about our video? Please feel free to comment below with your ideas. For more updates in the future, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I appreciate you coming.